It's good to be home again.
Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City. And now somewhere in upstate New York, she's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm very happy it's December. It's a generally pleasant month of the year for a lot of people. A lot of holidays being shared and experienced with folks. And so I find that a lot of people are generally happy around this time of year. Sometimes it also means like vacation.
Your beliefs do not match the research that shows that there's a lot of loneliness and depression around this time of year.
That is true. That is true. I am fortunate. I have a lot to be thankful for. Yeah. I am not one of those people. December is often a time that is pleasant for me, but I totally understand that it's not for everyone. And that's a good call. I have to say that we've been getting a lot of really good feedback on our reviews of X-Men, the animated series. And I'm pleased with the idea of going forward with that. We're going into our fourth episode. This one is Deadly Reunions. And, as you can probably imagine from the title, there are several folks who knew each other way back when, reunited in this episode.
It's a good one. There's flashbacks.
Yeah.
Actually, most of the episodes that we've seen have flashbacks, but these are really telling flashbacks when the characters who have conflict with one another are reunited.
Yeah.
We often will see something that might either have contributed to that conflict or might have been a part of that character psychology that lends itself to their perspectives, their beliefs, the reasoning behind their behavior. And I really like that about this show. I do like when the writing opens it up to interpretation, where the audience can wonder and be curious about, like, why would Magneto, let's say, be so fixed in his very strong beliefs about the mutant movement, or rather the liberation movement for mutants. And so we get a little glimpse into what shapes his psychology there. I do think there's still a little room for interpretation, which I think is really good. No story is going to be straightforward, but we do get a sense of the events and relationships and the traumas that then perpetuate some of the ideas that they have moving forward. And that has this distinct flavor. Like throughout the episode, we see the reunion, the flashback, and then the conflict. So it's kind of neat.
You brought up Magneto a moment ago and the ambiguity there. And I want to read a message from someone on Discord. Big Mikey Waz responded to something I had said in the previous episode. That's episode 215, Inner Magneto. Toward the end, you compared Magneto to Superman, saying they were opposites. While I see how it could be looked at this way, I feel it was more their experience with humanity that was the defining characteristic of their morality, not their inherent nature. I think Maggie is more akin to the injustice soups than the opposite of the Man of Steel we all know. Big Mikey Waz, I actually agree with you. I don't think that that we're not on the same page. In fact, my thought process at the time wasn't so much looking at nature versus nurture. It was looking at the environment and how Superman Clark Kent was not allowed to use his superpowers
Right.
when he was young, and he saw that as an unfair advantage, whereas Magneto was not allowed to use his superpowers because he was told to hide them, and he saw that as an unfair disadvantage to himself to not be allowed to use the gifts he had.
He felt that he was punished and oppressed
Yeah.
and singled out. It's almost as if there was this negative, and there is a negative association with having mutant powers. And when we talk about certain characters who recognize that, they can hide those powers, they can compromise those powers, they can showboat those powers, and there's going to be some consequences with the larger society feeling as though mutants are inferior to non-mutant humans.
Right.
Whereas Magneto, I think from the beginning has always believed that his abilities not only were inherent to him, a part of his personality, his personhood, but have made him stronger, they represent to him characteristics that are his strengths.
Right.
And so for someone to deny him of those abilities, or worse, characterize him as bad because he has those abilities, has been like one of the major contributors to his overall personality. I was going to say like somewhat of a Machiavellian type, personality, but we will get into that.
Yes. As we move forward in this episode, in the beginning, Charles Xavier is diving into the mind of Sabretooth. He is trying to do what he did with Logan many years ago, which is to sort of tamp down the rage. He's trying to explore.
We need to talk about this. I'm still thinking about the ethics of this. Like, what is your explanation of what Professor X is doing with Sabretooth?
Oh, so now we're getting into the general ethical or the general relationship that Charles Xavier has with ethics.
Well, I mean, I think so with Sabretooth especially, and we didn't see, this is clearly something he's done with Wolverine, but we didn't observe that. And he claims to be using the same technique. At one point, he calls it therapy with Sabretooth. And what we understand is that Professor X is using his mentalism. I don't know if that's the best word, but his powers of the mind to probe into Sabretooth's psychology.
His telepathy.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think I understand that mechanism.
Well, there's a moment in here that really disturbed me. And I want to play it for you because I do have a little bit of audio from this, specifically from this moment. And by the way, for folks who are watching this podcast, because we now do video podcasts, I have to warn you that I don't have an adequate way of showing you the video clip as I had hoped to do. In the last episode, it sort of turned up as black screens. That's because the video is protected online. We're still working on a way for that. So
maybe we can show a still of the scene.
Yeah. So okay. Don't get confused if suddenly things go dark here. But yeah, let me play this audio for us here. Let's take a listen.
What are you hiding from me, Sabretooth? Why do you keep these thoughts from me? Can they be so painful? Don't resist me. I will know it all in time.
I have so many issues with this. Look,
Sabretooth has literally put himself, we talk about raising walls. He has literally put himself into like a concrete brick little box. And Xavier's just like, just tell me, I'm going to find out.
Well, so the way that Professor X talks about it is that he's going to alleviate his rages.
Yeah.
That's the intended outcome.
Yeah.
Professor X believes that he's going to help Sabretooth. He's going to, he uses the word alleviate. So he's going to decrease these angry emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And Sabretooth. And what it requires, as we understand it, is this kind of therapy of infiltrating Sabretooth's mind and better understanding the events, the situations, the potential violence that has created this anger within Sabretooth. And while I don't disagree with that theory or that understanding, that the more I know about what happened to you, the more that I can really help you interpret the feelings that you hold, the feelings you express, and how you're creating, or how you've developed schema about your world, about other people, about yourself. That in and of itself doesn't bother me. What bothers me is this is a very intrusive therapy.
Right.
Any therapy, let's just take a few steps back though. Any therapy requires consent by the patient.
Well, and as we know, Sabretooth at this point is, I guess, technically unconscious. Is he still in his coma? He has been subdued for sure. He's been locked onto this gurney, this bed in the high-tech Xavier Institute med bay.
But there are going to be medical and even psychiatric interventions you use under very rare circumstances. These are exigent circumstances where the client is unable to provide that consent. They're not conscious, or they're not in a state of mind that they can do that. And usually someone will do it by way of like a guardian, a family member, somebody who is able to provide that consent for them. And even in situations where the person is coherent and is able to agree to the treatment, you tell them what you're going to be doing. Here's the nature of this kind of intervention. Here's what the expectations are. Do you have questions about what we're about to do? There is this clear, non-consensual, sort of non-agreed upon, and nothing is talked about either, so it's not agreed upon.
And Sabretooth actually flees him a couple of times.
He's basically saying, I don't want this.
Like, I don't want it. I don't want it. And Xavier's like, come on, just tell me what happened to you. Let me share your pain. And it's like, well, this isn't, you don't get to decide if Sabretooth wants to share his pain with you. Like, you can't just tell him to. I imagine that there's got to be a certain level of trust built up between client and therapist, and this isn't necessarily how you get there.
Right. And so what I was about to say is, so it can't happen when someone is not conscious, but it also cannot happen when a person feels coerced either. So there has to be this, like you're saying, this full disclosure of what this intervention is going to be, opportunities to ask questions, opportunities to deny the intervention, and none of those things happen. Mm-hmm. So it's forced upon him. It's not an emergency situation where we would think, look, there's no other choice. This is a life or death situation. He has to have this intervention. And I think there's some values here. There's some assumptions that Professor X imposes on his client, which I need to talk about in a moment too. Like, why does he have, who gives, or what authority, what agency gives Professor X the credentials to perform these treatments? Like, what is happening?
Okay, so in the first episode, I mentioned that I didn't know what degrees Xavier has. And so I then went and did some research. In the comics, at least, he has many degrees, multiple doctorates. One of them, he is a PhD in psychology, I believe. And so I guess he has been accredited. He's attended an accredited university. He has been given his certifications, and I guess, but I don't know who is behind that. So I can't tell you who gives him this authority, but he has degrees and certifications.
I think I would believe that he has the training and expertise. He strikes me as somebody who, on the one hand, is ethical in that he would never perform these so-called therapies if he were not fully informed, fully, I guess, credentialed in the ways that he should be. Where this is not ethical is that really this should be about the client's choice and their opportunity to actually to select from multiple therapeutic options, and again to have the chance to say no and not agree to this kind of treatment. So there's a lot here that I already feel is very very shady, unethical.
Let me take this down another path.
Okay.
We learned that this is treatment similar to what Charles did with Logan.
Mm-hmm.
Logan is certainly not without rage. So it's not like Xavier went in and pacified him or subdued him to a degree that he is not still himself. He is just not angry at the world anymore. And so I wonder if seeing Logan's reaction to having had this done before is in some way a sign that Xavier knows just how far to go without going too far over a particular personal boundary or line. Does that make sense?
Well, what would be too far?
I don't know.
Okay.
But my understanding is he did it to Wolverine. Wolverine is still there with them. Wolverine still views Xavier as a ally and potential father figure, maybe, I don't know, but he sees him as an authority figure, and I've got to think that to some degree he may even approve of what Charles did to him when he was younger, when he was in an earlier time. And again, younger is a relative term because we've established that at the time of this show, he would have been 93. But
well, and the part too that, I was saying like this is imposing his values on him, I guess. And really what I mean by that is Professor X views Sabretooth's behavior and expression of his rage as a problem. And look, let me say, yes, we see Sabretooth. We've seen a few interactions involving Sabretooth. There is a lot of destructive behavior. There's a lot of antisocial behavior. I would agree that he is outside the norm in terms of the amount of violence that he engages in,
and the amount of abs he has.
He has like 24 abs.
He has got a lot of abs.
Maybe that is linked to this in some way. Like at some
abs
point, once you develop that many abs, you're just so aggressive.
I would be rageful. But
yeah. And so it's, on the one hand, I agree that we're observing some problematic behavior as part of our assessment. We're noticing that he is quite violent. The decision that Professor X makes to go ahead and try to excise or find the origin of this rage and take it out of his brain is, I think, such an intrusive intervention without better understanding.
Yeah.
What are we really talking about? Is this actual rage, or are we witnessing that, and underneath that observable horror, there's something there. There's trauma, there's pain,
and something you said,
loss.
It almost makes it sound like a lobotomy, where it's like, let me take this from you. This piece of who you are. Now, Charles does say, let me shoulder this. Let me take some of this pain.
He's such a martyr. But Sabretooth never, I'm getting fully and more annoyed as we talk about it, because Sabretooth never says, I want to be different. Sabretooth is like fully fine with who he is.
Yeah.
And at this point, at least,
he never said, I want to be an X-Men, so please do what you need to make me one of you. He never gives any sort of. Now we learn later on that he would have, if he needed to, in order to get the mission complete, because it turns out Magneto sent him with the intention of being captured by the X-Men, taken back to the manor, given the opportunity to be prodded. So then it makes me wonder if he's now allowing, he would have consented because
Sure.
that's part of the plan.
That was the scheme.
But now he has to escape. There's a moment where Xavier has sort of going through the POV of Sabretooth. He sees that he was in a cage. People were poking him with sticks and prodding him. It was a circus-like type environment. Those people then become demons in Sabretooth's psyche. Emotionally, they were demons to him. And I feel like it was at that moment when Sabretooth then disengages and escapes to the cement shelter, like maybe Xavier was going, like he was succeeding. Like maybe, oh, this is scary. I wasn't supposed to let this happen. I need to destroy the manor from the inside out. I wonder if the probing was actually winning Sabretooth over until he got scared of facing those fears and that rage and the source of it.
Sure. And again, this very sort of what we would consider a fantasy version, almost a sci-fi version of what trauma interventions might look like. It does match the efforts of therapists, again, to better understand the origins of psychic pain, which may include abuse. It may include this social harm. It may include literally being neglected, trapped, all these things that manifest in these dreamlike visions that we're seeing in this kind of session with Sabretooth. And that's not, in and of itself, that level of I guess that those observations, those connections, helping that client link those events to how they see the world today, that is very therapeutic. That's a part of a lot of different trauma therapies. You don't do that when the client is not present with you and on that journey with you. So it's, again, it's just this very, very interesting. Well, and let me give Professor X credit in that Sabretooth is present, because in this version of a psychic probe, if you will, he is in his subconscious, like Professor X is in his subconscious. So Sabretooth is present with him. They're having this dialogue,
but still not vocal.
Kind of walking through.
He's not actually saying anything though, right? He's still just doing the almost Frankenstein's monsters. Like he's still resisting. Doing that up until the point that he then begins to speak to Jubilee later, I think.
Yeah, you're right. And a part of this too is like, he's clearly, not only is he resisting, and I don't think this is a part of the act, but he is in pain. He's he can't tolerate this level of distress, and he's being pushed further and further into these like multi-sensory discomforts. And I think it's just not the way to help somebody.
Right.
And it's interesting too, because I think, who is it? Is it Jubilee? Professor X asked someone to assist. Maybe it is Wolverine. He asked him to assist with the next phase of therapy. And I'm just like, who is everyone? Like, where's
the privacy?
Where's the confidentiality? You're just like telling other people like, oh yeah, you're going to help and you're going to be a part of it. Oh, I need you. And none of this has been cleared with the actual client.
Yeah. Wolverine makes some comment about like, oh, I'll happily clear out some holes in the brain, whatever. Like he is basically saying he wants to lobotomize him with his claws. Okay. So that's Sabretooth. And that is Wolverine's deadly reunion. The other reunion in this episode is Charles and Magnus. They did not meet face to face in the last episode when Magneto was at the military base and was taking on various members of the X-Men. But now there's an opportunity for Magnus to lure Charles out by attacking a refinery or factory, something along those lines. And while all the workers are being traumatized by Magneto, Xavier sends the X-Men out. He basically says, we've got to stop the Master of Magnetism. And then instantly it cuts to a shot of a gigantic, fully metal airplane carrying all the X-Men. I was like, I don't think you were thinking this through.
Well, also, so he sends Storm, Cyclops, and Rogue, and they all go in first. And it's not until they're disarmed that he then rolls in.
Yeah, he comes in as a surprise, which could have been part of the tactic because Magnus specifically wanted Charles to come. He wanted to see him face to face. He expresses his disappointment by Charles not coming with the other X-Men. And then as he sort of fights them, Charles then comes in and saves the day. So it's almost like, well, I'll send those in as a distraction, knowing that I'll always be there to jump in when necessary. And he does. He tries to talk Magnus down, but, it doesn't work out. And then eventually he begins intruding into Magnus's mind.
Then again, I'm like, did you really have to weaponize trauma? Which I think is what he's doing.
He is totally weaponizing trauma. Talk about that. Talk about what the trauma is. He
knows that Magneto has a very difficult past.
Coming from a war-torn country. And
a tremendous amount of persecution, of international conflict, combat trauma. And here we learn that Magneto was just a little boy when he started to experience this, what we imagine is repeated war trauma. And Professor X knows although he wasn't there during that time, he knows that memory is stored somewhere in the recesses of Magneto's brain.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses that memory basically to disarm Magneto,
he drives him down to his knees.
And I would like you to play this clip because here you have one of the, think about the other X-Men who are battling Magneto. Storm, Cyclops, Rogue, they're very powerful.
Yeah.
They don't manage to overcome him. Magneto is a very powerful mutant. Professor X completely brings him down to such just a vulnerable state. It's actually quite surprising how incapable he becomes because of this memory that's been brought to the present.
Yeah. So I'm going to take a listen. Here we go. Let's play it.
Mama, Papa. No. Don't make me see. Xavier, I can't. Stop it. Stop it.
No, Magneto. You will stop.
No.
And at this point, he leaves. So it's a successful tactic.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the X-Men need to recover. Something else was going on. Rogue had to give Cyclops CPR.
Yes.
And so by touching him, she then took on his powers. So there's this little bit of a B story there, or C story rather.
Because it's not very consequential. There isn't.
You learn a little bit more about Rogue.
Yeah.
Something that we kind of knew before, but she had never done this before. So,
but she's also very respectful too. It's weird because, I gotta be honest, if I'm performing CPR on someone, I'm probably not thinking about whether they A, enjoy it, and B, are coupled with another person. but she's very respectful. She's like, I know you'd probably hate this, but I'm going
I
to
have
put
to
my
do
lips
it.
on your lips. And I was like, oh, is he going to hate it because you're draining all of his power? Or is he going to hate it because he's dating Jean? And then later she's like, I won't tell Jean. And you're like,
And he's uncomfortable.
and he's and yeah.
I
Well,
sort-
no. She says, I won't tell Jean after he sort of she sort of wakes him up.
Yeah.
But then later
Later.
when she takes him back to the mansion, she's like, when are we going to do this again? And he's real uncomfortable.
So my favorite thing now is other people making Cyclops, or rather
Really
Scott,
uncomfortable,
uncomfortable, and
yeah.
Rogue somehow knows how to do this.
Yeah.
So I really liked that.
Something else I liked, it's entirely unbelievable, but in the context of a animated series, ostensibly for children, but enjoyed by adults, I love that regardless of how long she's known Scott, she doesn't know how to turn the optic blasts off. She's like, how do I turn these things off? He's like, close your eyes. And so she does. And that's when it's like, at no point in time has Scott ever told her or anyone, oh yeah, it turns out if I just close my eyes, or how the ruby glasses work with the visor or any of that. Like,
yeah, he can adjust it.
But I appreciate from the perspective of writers that have to tell the audience how this works, that this is a great way to do it by having Rogue, someone who doesn't normally get these powers or have these powers, get them and suddenly have to figure out how to turn them off. It is amusing.
And by the way, Storm, who is arguably a very formidable mutant and has tremendous powers, is overtaken by Magneto, and she's thrown against a wall, and these they look like bricks. They look like parts of the wall are coming down on her, and she has a flashback of a very early childhood memory of some similar destructive act. We can't tell
bricks
yet.
falling around her,
Yeah.
basically a building collapsing
We
around
don't know
her as
yet,
a child.
If it's natural disaster related, or maybe human created disaster or trauma, but she immediately becomes emotionally overtaken by this memory and weakened too. She is unable to get back up, and she needs Rogue's help.
Yeah, they genuinely make her look terrified in that moment.
Yeah,
which is very it's a powerful moment.
Well, and the difference is that Magneto didn't specifically instill or trigger this memory on purpose. This was something that just happened to be a coincidence.
Oh, so talk about that a little bit too. I mean, yes, Charles is the one who's triggering those memories in Sabretooth and in Magneto. And in Magneto's case is genuinely weaponizing it against him. However, talk about the very real world triggers that people might, she sees falling bricks around her and suddenly she's taken back to her childhood. This has nothing to do with a mutant ability.
It's a very human response. And the word trigger is so ubiquitous now. Everyone's using that language in very nonchalant, casual ways. The clinical term trigger does refer to any kind of experience that brings the senses back to an origin of trauma. And it's really interesting when I work with clients, we talk about how subtle those triggers can be in terms of the nuances of what kind of brings our memories forth. What pulls some very visceral, vivid memories from the back of your mind, where you may have even, not really either given it that much thought or have specifically avoided thinking about it, to the forefront of your mind.
Yeah.
And suddenly there are these immediate reactions that you can feel in your body. Some of those reactions feel very much like the reaction that you had during the original trauma. And that's why people will often avoid triggers. It can be as subtle as seeing someone that looks like maybe somebody who victimized you. It could be as subtle as a smell, like a scent, which brings you back. That's a very powerful linkage or connection, association to early memories. It can be a texture, something you touch. So the senses are very attuned, and there's a neurobiological reason for that. It's a very protective thing. We don't want to get into trouble again. We don't want to be in harm's way again. So we're avoiding, we're picking up on these nuances and avoiding the things that our brain has told us could harm us. And we also know, and this is what we work on in therapy, that a lot of those triggers are safe, and they just happen to link back or bring a connection, spark a connection or an association simply through the neurobiology of the brain. And that, we really need to do a little bit of work to unlink or at least massage that association. So not every time you smell a pine tree or whatever, you're gonna be in harm's way. So that's an example.
Let me ask you this, because I think you're sort of going down this path, and I want to make it very clear for the audience. You said that people will use the term trigger nonchalantly, and there's a difference between the way some people use it and the way that like clinicians would use it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're saying that triggers themselves are not harmful. They just happen to be connected to that thing that gives you anxiety or just brings back something to do with that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
In discussing things like trigger warnings, for example, are those actually helping the people by avoiding the thing that triggers them? Or is there some bit of, helpfulness, some sort of health benefits to being triggered? If that's the right sort of.
I mean, you've opened up a really complex idea, because on the one hand, yes, I'll say for the most part, everyday triggers are not harmful in and of themselves. I'm really glad that we got to this episode and we saw how upset Magneto was, the level of distress, how he became powerless. He became overwhelmed with his distress. He was immediately brought back to this visceral childhood level of psychic pain. And the reason I appreciated that moment is that even the most, like the strongest people who even have experienced therapy, people who have who consider themselves intelligent, people who consider themselves emotionally grounded, any one of us could have an experience like this where we're completely overtaken by a memory like that. And I do have a caveat with that. The reason why I appreciated that is that most of us actually will have some kind of traumatic past. And most of us, of the people that have traumatic histories or the experiences of traumatic events, the brain is pretty magnificent, and we will have the inherent neurobiological makeup to work on overcoming, synthesizing that memory, learning how to overcome it, learning how, yes, it's protective and safe to avoid situations like that. So like, look, this is a very minor example, but like I slipped on the ice. I'm going to be very watchful walking on ice so that I don't fall on my A again, right? So it's this very similar kind of learning process. For Magneto, he really exemplifies an idea that a lot of people with unresolved trauma feel. And that's even thinking about it, even having that memory feels dangerous to me. I feel like I'm back in that situation and I am not safe. And the reason I say that is that so many people, so many clients especially, will say, I'm even scared of therapy because that memory itself feels so real.
Yeah, you don't want to face it.
I don't want to be in that.
No.
And triggers can bring back little bits and pieces of that. But one of the things that I really wish I could tell Magneto was, it is just a memory.
Yeah.
No memory will harm you. You are not unsafe. Now you're unsafe because Professor X is trying to do all this stuff to you. Then I'm mad at him.
You're in a
for.
burning building and the
Right.
bricks are collapsing.
Those are
around
other reasons
everybody.
why you might not be safe. But that memory, that childhood memory that you're holding sacred somewhere in the recesses of your mind, that is not dangerous to you.
Yeah.
And he hasn't learned that yet. And Professor X knows it. So he weaponizes that memory and he makes him go back to that moment in childhood. And next thing we know, he's cowering on the floor and he has to escape.
Now, someone might argue that Xavier's not trying to weaponize it. It's just the outcome. It's just how it, like, it could be a, remember when you were this sad little boy, now you're going to make other people sad little boy, you know, whatever. And then, but just facing that traumatic moment is what drives Magneto to his knees. Although Magneto does then acknowledge, I may have underestimated, but I won't again. Like now I'm coming for real.
He's sort of he's motivated to face this is not the end of his battle with Professor X. He's no longer in a place where he wants to convince the X-Men to join him in his crusade.
Yeah.
But he still sees them as a threat. In answering your question about trigger warnings, I'm one of those people that I think just generally having some information, which I don't think we should use trigger warning, maybe like content disclosure or content warning disclaimer, something like that is helpful. I think we've talked about this on the show, but anytime we watch it's not anytime we watch a movie, but if there's a movie I'm less familiar with, I might look it up on a website called Does the Dog Die?
Right.
Because I'm very sensitive to animals being abused or animal death in films. And so I will just look up that film on doesthedogdie.com and it will have various situations, scenarios that
it's not just, we should say it's
maybe
not just about animals dying.
It's all
being
sorts of
it's
things.
Everything.
Like, does a bug get squashed? Does someone's eye get poked? Is
there
there
bad language?
childbirth? Is there a dragon? Like all these things that some people might be sensitive to. I wouldn't even say that those are, and I think the website even says it says like, here are your main triggers,
Yeah.
and we'll list them. I think for me, as a psychologist, I want to uplift that word and be careful about overusing that language. And so for me, it's like I have a sensitivity to these concepts, these themes. And I sometimes want to know about it ahead of time.
But doesn't just using the words trigger warning, because usually it's followed by something, usually it's trigger warning. There are scenes depicting domestic violence. Wouldn't just that then potentially trigger
Not really.
someone? No,
Not necessarily.
so they don't think back to the time that they were abused and they're like, well, I won't watch this show, but now I'm also thinking about the time I was abused.
It could lend itself to some additional thoughts, some intrusive thoughts or worrisome thoughts that person may have. And by the way, that's not inherently bad. And I go back to the scene with Magneto, that looking back on those memories, that in and of itself is not maladaptive. It's not harmful to you. It's not going to push you further into pain and distress.
I think that's what I meant when I was asking about the term trigger warnings and whether being triggered could sometimes maybe be useful, like experiencing it and knowing that memory can't hurt me might actually be therapeutic.
I would say not in the way that Professor X implements it, because again, it's not consensual.
Yeah.
He's doing it in sort of an impulsive way. And I'm going to agree with you that maybe his intention wasn't to
drive him to his knees.
Yeah, maybe his intention was to humanize him, let's remind you that your violence originates early on in the way that you felt as a child.
Yeah.
But you do that, if you're going to do that, again, you do it with agreed upon consent. You do that with some full disclosure on what it is that you're doing. And so that's why here I felt like he was using it as a weapon, and it didn't result. I guess it resulted in their ability to get out of danger, but it didn't really result in making any kind of headway with Magneto. So
I will ask you this about Xavier, though, because Xavier does come around when they return to the mansion, and we learn that Sabretooth was actually sent there to infiltrate the mansion and destroy it from the inside out. Xavier then goes to Wolverine afterward, who is injured by Sabretooth, and says he's sorry. He apologizes for not listening to him in the previous episode when Wolverine called him out for his hypocrisy, for being willing to go after his old nemesis, but not Wolverine's. And so there is a sort of a humbling moment here with Xavier and Wolverine. What did you think of that?
I appreciated it. I think Professor X can lean into his humility more, and he acknowledges he knows he's not perfect.
Yeah.
It really makes me wonder what happened. What was the outcome of Wolverine's so-called treatment? And do they both, like, if you interview
in what way?
Like,
I mean, aren't we kind of seeing the outcome to some degree every time we see him? I mean, he still has a hard time maintaining his temper when saying, as long as Sabretooth's here, I'm not going to be. He's almost avoiding not a trigger, not it's an emotional trigger. He desperately wants to kill Sabretooth because of the things that he's done. Right. And we've learned now in this episode that part of that trauma is that Sabretooth killed some of Wolverine's buddies when they were working together, that they were at one time partners, similar to Xavier and Magneto, or Magnus at the time. But when you say you want to know what the outcome was, isn't it that, because this is now the second time that we've learned that Wolverine was very much like Sabretooth at some point in time in the beginning, equally rageful and berserker at all times. And now he's able to use his big boy words sometimes. And
I even though we didn't see him pre-intervention,
we might.
We hopefully will get some other flashbacks involving Wolverine.
Get some Weapon X moments.
Yeah. And I also would love a whole like deep dive into Berserker Wolverine, because I'm not too familiar with, I don't know, that state of mind.
His Berserker rage.
Yeah. Like I want to know more about that. But I do wonder, I think what I'm understanding is that Wolverine now has more skills in emotion management. So he still has rage. So it's not as if Professor X completely eliminated the rage within Wolverine, right, nor did Professor X make him forget what happened in his past, because Wolverine has a pretty good memory.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd say that his memories are what helps shape how he sees the world.
He has a pretty good memory beyond a certain point. He doesn't know his origin, but he knows the Weapon X program. Yeah. He knows, having worked with Sabretooth, yeah, he knows all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess what I'm saying is maybe these were very positive outcomes. He can self-regulate. He can manage really tough, difficult emotions. He doesn't let the rage evolve into destructive tendencies. And these are all good things.
He did take the top off of Scott's car. He does.
It's all relative.
Yeah, he does have destructive tendencies. He's just not going to pick up a car and throw it across the street like Sabretooth was doing.
Sure. And so, and again, maybe Sabretooth, if given the opportunity to articulate the concerns he has about himself, maybe he would be open to this kind of treatment.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up too in this discussion is this concept. And look, I'm not saying that Magneto, I mean, you talk about Wolverine not remembering some things, and I'm not saying that Magneto doesn't remember what happened to him as a kid, but it almost came across as if he was seeing that memory for the first time.
Yeah.
And it
Well, from that
sparked.
perspective anyway, because when we see it, it's of a small boy, little blonde boy or something, like experiencing this trauma. And it's very possible that while he experienced it, he's never had it thrown back at him before. So now he's
Right.
experiencing it again.
It's as if, it's as if he hasn't had that memory in a while. It
Yeah.
made me think about, and by his own doing.
And I was going to say, I think that memory is easily a catalyst for his own rage against humanity, to some degree. But I feel like it's just the beginning of a long history of traumas. And so to go back to the beginning is particularly painful for him.
It makes me wonder if Professor X is also trying to do or implement some of these recovered memory therapies.
Yeah.
So we see this a lot. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it's important to, demystify these so-called treatments, especially because the media shows quite a lot of these very, very specialized therapists and psychologists or psychiatrists who use so-called recovered memory therapies. And they're named all sorts of, sometimes they call it hypnosis. They can call it dream interpretation, age regression therapy, psychodrama. There's all sorts of names for it. And the research is really lacking that would back up this real scientific explanation that you can recover a childhood trauma simply by putting someone under a different state of mind, like a regressive state or like a hypnotic state.
And folks have even said that in those states of susceptibility, you're potentially implanting a memory that never happened or suggesting
it's quite
something.
It is quite harmful to the degree that you have a very you in these cases typically, and by the way, this was something that therapists actually did in the 80s and 90s, and it became
but still do.
Some of them still do it. Yeah. I mean, there's some irresponsibility I want to highlight here, because while both therapists and clients, again, especially several decades ago when this was more popular, while they have claimed that the memory has been recovered, there is more evidence to show that that memory was co-created by the therapist and the client, and that they had similar goals to make sense of why a person is presenting with maybe the traumatic responses or the relational difficulties or other challenges they have in their life.
And this can be harmful not just to the person,
Mhm.
but to people around them too, because suddenly it's potentially finger pointing that you did something to this person, and they're like, that never happened. That's never happened. And in fact, there have been people convicted of crimes based on recovered memories that the juries believed were true, only to later be overturned convictions because these things didn't happen.
Yeah. And there's a bit of scientific evidence that shows that, in fact, memories are encoded, traumatic memories are encoded with a significant amount of emotional processing.
Yeah.
And so memories that kind of coincide with strong emotions are more likely to be remembered. And that's why we have very strong reactions to significant memories, whether they're traumatic, positive or not. They're encoded with these emotional signals.
So what you're saying is it's unlikely to recover a memory that would have been so traumatic because it would have been encoded in, because it was attached to such strong emotions at the time.
Yes. And again, these are fictional characters, but in the case of Magneto, he's probably resisted the memory, avoided any, connections, associations to it.
But it's just
And-
constantly been replaced by one more trauma after another sort of thing too.
Yeah.
He may not even had to have been consciously avoiding it. It's not the one he thinks of when he thinks of the time that, because we've already seen one history, of him and Xavier together, and they were both working in they were aiding people in his home country, and then those people were attacked and killed, presumably, which then just angered Magneto even more, Magnus even more. So he doesn't go back to that childhood trauma, which might be a good reason to use that particular trauma against him.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of conversations about Xavier going forward, and specifically about whether he's genuinely a good person or simply trying to be diplomatic between mutants and
No, I mean, I think at this point,
non-mutants.
I can say that he believes in his own ideology, and
So does Magnus.
Well, and so Professor X, not only does he strongly believe in his, I said ideology, more specifically, his call to action, his own belief that he is equipped and competent enough to be the leader of the X-Men, and that he's moving by way of this leadership and training the X-Men, and even using some emotional guidance, almost like a parent figure, that he believes he's pushing the liberation movement forward. And it's difficult to say that he's being successful.
Yeah.
I think he believes he's heroic. It's unclear if he's realizing that he could be doing some harm with his actions.
And he's got that sort of parental status of, look, what I'm doing right now, you may not like, but in the end, it's going to benefit you. And I do it because I love you, that sort of thing. When a lot of times it's just unhelpful and can be hurtful.
And yeah, and I and you mentioned this, but I do love that he is able to identify lessons learned in this movement, because he recognizes, and we're jumping to the end when Sabretooth manages to convince Jubilee to let him free. She's simply being kind and
empathetic. She sees that his arm is a little scraped or uncomfortable because of the restraints he's in, and she lets them go.
And there's sympathy there garnered by this situation. No one wants to see a mutant chained down like this.
Yeah.
And again, that sort of upsets me when I think about like Professor X chaining down this mutant, subduing him, violating his mind when he didn't ask for this. All these things where I'm like, you're kind of doing harm.
I guess
to
the real
person.
question is, so let's say Sabretooth resisted it.
Uh-huh.
But Charles, being Charles, and is just so good at it, he eventually tears down these cement walls, much like all the walls in this universe. It's like none of them were actually created with mortar, because everybody's flying through every wall.
Right.
But if Charles were eventually successful, would that be kind of a brainwashing more than anything? Like
it would be a trauma bond.
Yeah.
Because maybe Sabretooth
talk about that, trauma bond.
Sabretooth would feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, the person who is controlling me, and there's this power dynamic, and I have to be submissive to them. I'm not conscious during the things that they're doing to me, but then I feel better. Then it creates this kind of repeated cycle of harm being done, and then a level potentially of safety, security, healing, forgiveness. And then inevitably, because Professor X is who he is, may continue to impose this concept of like, I know more than you do. I know what's best for you.
Yeah.
This is what you need to do. So that's what I meant by that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we are naming something else that is also not only used more in casual conversation, trauma bond, but it's used wrong in a lot of ways. A trauma bond is not simply a collection of people or two people experiencing the same
shared trauma.
Yeah, that would be shared trauma.
That's shared trauma.
Yeah, this is something else. This is when you actually connect to your abuser. You start to form, it could be an amorous connection. It could be a more of a relational survivorship type of connection. But that there's this unhealthy bond with the person who's actually harming you. And it's actually really common. That's what I think what would happen. And now that we're talking about that, isn't that Wolverine and Professor X?
That's what I was asking. Like, isn't that what that is now?
It could be. We really need to explore this more. Getting back to Jubilee, she has sympathy for her fellow mutant. He convinces her to unshackle one of his wrists, and then of course he overtakes her, and it's actually quite disturbing. He puts her in this kind of like wrestling hold, and he is way stronger, I mean, and physically massive. Bigger than she is, so it's really upsetting. And this scene lasts for a held moment where she's almost being crushed by him. And he explains that this is all part of a plan that he and Magneto had. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that later Professor X realizes he has to be more, he has to use discernment in his actions. Being a mutant does not necessarily mean that someone is going to be willing to be affiliated with the X-Men, and also does not necessarily automatically mean they're going to be good.
Yeah, like it doesn't give you a pass to become an X-Men just because you have a mutant ability and are good at what you do, or, you know.
Oh, and that's really the humanization of mutants as well. They're not all bad. They're not all good. They're just like people in that there's a ton of variance in their motivations, their behavior, their own ideology, and how they'll access their power and how they'll utilize their power to achieve their own goals in this world.
We should remind folks, as Senator Kelly does at the end of the episode, when he announces his presidency or his candidacy for president, he reminds us that in just 4 episodes, the mutants have attacked the Mutant Control Agency. They have attacked a missile base, Drake missile base. They have attacked and destroyed a chemical plant. I have a feeling this isn't going to end anytime soon, but I wonder how many people are now willing to jump onto Senator Kelly's side when he's even talking about, if I get elected president, there will be internment camps for mutants. I mean, he's saying the quiet part out loud in his speech where he announces his candidacy. And yet, I wonder how many people are like, well, yeah, we have to do that because look at all the damage that's just been done in 4 episodes.
He does also say, I'm not making his agenda any lighter, but I am saying that he adds, and maybe this is to try to convince his, he's trying to convince voters and his constituents why this is a good idea. He says that the mutants in internment camps will receive the benefits of what is he calling them? Sort of like aid or reparative interventions, something that will that will somehow treat their situation, their conditions.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that, again, we see a lot of themes come up. Sometimes they're medicalizing the mutant gene, which makes sense because it is a part of your DNA. And so there should be some medical, physical treatments for this that I'm sure scientists are excited to explore, if not, already coming up with these blood-based interventions, these treatments, vaccines, things like that. But then you also have kind of the social aspects of it. And that's where things get really dicey. Are we saying that we're going to take care of these folks and help them? Or are we saying that we're the ones who need help because we feel unsafe around this community?
So, Drea, now that we've reached the end of that episode, how do you feel about this show going forward? We're 4 episodes in. You're clearly seeing a lot of really good content to pull for your own analyses.
Yeah, I really want more characters to get folded in to the narrative. We haven't really seen Gambit for a while. I think there's a couple other characters that we could get to know. So we've seen like nothing of Jean. Right. Well, Jean was mentioned in this episode, but I don't think we saw Jean in this episode.
She's like never there.
So yeah, I think a little bit more of their histories. Clearly they're building a storyline for Storm because we saw a little bit about her childhood.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think more of that. But overall, this really is the story between Professor X and Magneto. And that story forms kind of like a core narrative that's going to give us these ideas and invitations to talk more about other characters who will respond to their ideology, who will be like, who will co-sign into it, who will rebel against it. And so I think we're all seeing these different reactions and responses, and that is what frames our understanding of their psychology. Yeah. So if that makes sense, that's kind of the foundation. And then these other dramas are helping us make sense of that foundational main a storyline.
Right.
It looks like we're going to have one more episode for the end of this calendar year, and that is our favorite holiday episode. There is something that we definitely need to cover. I don't want to give it away, but it's holiday related.
Okay.
And it's Batman related. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And we're going to cover it on the next episode.
Those of you watching right now on Patreon,
some people know exactly.
I genuinely look baffled right now because we have not discussed this, and I do not know what we are now covering in the next episode. It's Batman related and it's holiday related.
And it is something that just came out this week.
Okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
I will, okay. I'll have to keep that in mind. Folks know what it is. Yeah. I know that I can almost hear them yelling at me right now. I cannot think of what it is, but okay, we are going to discuss that in the next episode.
I know we're going to thank some folks from Patreon. I just want to give a special shout out and thanks to our community on Discord. If you haven't yet joined our Discord, we welcome you. All you need to do is go to the Arkham Sessions Instagram, and it's in the bio, the direct link to our Discord. It's also on my Instagram, again, direct link in my bio. Please check it out. Thanks to the crowd who's already there. It's such a pleasure to be in the community with you.
Well, you mentioned your Instagram. Why don't you tell the good folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Drea Psychology, on Twitter at Arkham Asylum Doc, and then finally my website, drdreapsychology.com.
You can find me. I am at B_Ward028 on Instagram. You can find us both on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. As Drea mentioned, come join us over on Discord. And I want to give a very special thank you to our patrons who have made this episode possible. Aaron Winrick, our brand new patron, Mike Ficklin, Dr. Jerome Anderson, John Henry, Antonio Lopez, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Heroes Journey Fitness, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, Swara Sali, Rachel Acevedo Huffman, Dr. Girlfriend, and a very special thank you to my father, Carl Ward. We are recording this the day before his birthday, so he'll be listening to this a couple days afterward, but I want to wish him a very happy birthday. And thank you all for making this show possible. And of course, you can become a patron and get your name called out just by going to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. And we will be very happy to give you all the thanks you deserve. Until next time, why don't you go follow our family over at Fanbase Press? And we look forward to this mystery Batman related holiday themed episode coming up by the end of December. I'm still trying to figure out what it is. And that'll be fun. So until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
Wait, don't break our psychic link.